Greetings, dear friends. Today, in the АЛЛАТРA TV studio, we welcome the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Greetings.
Igor Mikhailovich, we, people, are actually a mystery not only to each other, but first of all to ourselves, especially when there is no knowledge and when there is no understanding of our own nature and the processes happening to us. And the knowledge that humankind had, or rather the knowledge that remained, was not enough to look behind the veil of all this multitude of unexplained mysteries, phenomena, and processes occurring both in the inner life of a human and in the outer life. This uncertainty frightens and immobilizes some people, while in others, on the contrary, an interest to learn everything to the smallest detail, to get to the bottom of it, is sparked. So precisely our viewers, being motivated by such a lively interest, have sent us their questions, including follow-up questions on the previous videos. And with these questions, I'd like to start our conversation. Here is one of the questions. In the video about the spiritual world, it was mentioned that when a person goes through a so-called near-death experience, he feels like he's flying through a tunnel and sees various images. At that time, you touched upon a very interesting point. You said, why does a human always perceive it in the form of a tunnel? Why is it exactly a tunnel? Could you please answer this question in more detail?
Of course I can. This is really interesting. And actually, many people who encounter an after-death experience but have an opportunity to come back observe this phenomenon, the tunneling effect. And many people talk about it. But if we recall that there are tunneling practices, there are cases when in spiritual practices, a person accidentally gets into the same conditions, and he also experiences this tunneling effect. Well, again, there are spiritual practices that are aimed precisely at tunneling. There are more meditative and spiritual. I mean, they are not purely spiritual practices, but meditative and spiritual ones. The initial stage of learning spiritual practices actually includes this practice of tunneling. Again, not for everyone, but only for those who will need this in the future. Yes, there is such a phenomenon. What is it caused by? It is actually caused by the fact that consciousness enters exactly its own level. In other words, our consciousness, human consciousness, is not in three-dimensionality. This is a well-known fact. It is at the level of the fourth and higher dimension, whereas our three-dimensionality is perceived through our brain. Let's put it this way. And that's where this very phenomenon occurs. So, when a person exits our three-dimensionality, and to be clear, he exits, let's say, mentally, meaning to the level of perception of the fourth dimension. And here is where the tunneling effect is formed, meaning it is precisely at this exit. Why does this happen? Because in our three-dimensionality, no matter where we look, we see images around us. We see three-dimensional objects. We see some material objects. In the fourth dimension, everything is perceived in a completely different way. And here it turns out that a person, being as consciousness and personality, which goes beyond three-dimensionality, sees everything around him, while there, perception is totally different. And this should be emphasized, too. Here we see from a limited angle of visual perception. So, we do not see what's going on behind us. When a person enters this tunnel, let's say, he has 360-degree vision, so he perceives everything around him and he perceives it holistically. And that's where this phenomenon occurs. In other words, he doesn't see what is happening further. He perceives it as a tunnel. And in this tunnel, three-dimensional images can emerge. Why? Because there is a freedom of consciousness itself. And in this case, secondary consciousness plays a huge role, and it can form both images and perception. While habitual perception is the perception it gives us as personality. And it gives this perception and the perception of ourselves in the range we are accustomed to, meaning, like in three-dimensionality, while everything around us is already not three-dimensional. Therefore, such an effect is formed.
Interesting.
I hope I explained it clearly, friends. If not, sorry, I did my best.
There is another question, Igor Mikhailovich. Very often, when people describe this moment of tunneling or near-death experience, they describe light, that they either see the light, or they enter the light, or they go beyond the light. So what is that?
Right. Well, not for everyone it is light. Some people perceive it, on the contrary, as darkness, as an abyss. It depends on a person, on the level of his preparedness and his intentions, meaning on his choice. If a person is attuned to spiritual development, then naturally, he sort of sees light at the end of the tunnel, and he is drawn to this light. So, because of that, he turns out to be as if sliding to this light. Yet, there are cases when a person gets there accidentally or engages in magic. Magic does not give light. Magic is an abyss. So, they perform practice, let's say, at the top of the tunnel, and they are very afraid to descend. Thus, many people who accidentally find themselves in this state, in tunneling, begin to also experience real and very intense fear. Why? Because they feel endlessness and an abyss. And this is what scares them, but not light. Whereas light is a natural transition from one world to the other, so to say. Well, the world is the same, but dimensions are different, more complex. It's a different level.
Does this indicate that the seventh dimension is beyond light?
No, surely not. The seventh dimension is actually much higher. This may be a transition to the fourth, fifth, or sixth dimension. When there is a transition from the third to the fourth dimension, a tunneling effect is already formed in our perception. These are the practices that have been described since ancient times, and a lot of people went through that. A lot of people practiced it. A simple example, a similar phenomenon definitely arises in everyone who practices, let's say, Jesus' prayer. A person practices it really seriously. I don't take those who liken themselves to those who did it, but really seriously. When a person starts living by this prayer, and he eventually encounters the tunneling effect, and this light is blissful, it's very important for them, and when they pass through it, only then do they actually succeed to attain what they've been striving for. Then this feeling of approaching arises, but beyond light. That is why many of them wrote that one should step over this light, pass through it without fear, while for many it is, on the contrary, repelling.
And what is beyond light? Can there be images or...
No, there already disappears. Such effects arise when a person performs the tunneling practice and passes through this light, and he starts seeing three-dimensional images. That's a game of consciousness. He hasn't performed anything. No practice has worked for him. A person had no experience. But he tries at the level of consciousness, like in some meditative practices. A person tries to perform it at the level of his imagination. And here, consciousness certainly begins to picture, to create illusions for him. It can create both light and transition, and it can also give an emotional tinge, everything. And there are three-dimensional images beyond the light, which means that a person hasn't performed anything. It's just a game of consciousness. While in reality, when a person goes beyond the light, any images disappear and any forms disappear. Then personality starts receiving real information. There's something different there.
Igor Mikhailovich, you've said that people can encounter a tunneling experience while performing spiritual practice. It's just that we received such a question that a person performed spiritual practice with pure intention. He sat down and found himself, he encountered a tunneling effect. He says, I felt myself falling into an abyss very fast. And the worst thing is that you do not see this light. You lose contact with the spiritual, and you cannot feel it in any way. So the question was, how can I get to this light? How can I establish this contact again? And why did it disappear?
Well, here, it has to be understood. I see. Why did it disappear? It disappeared because consciousness became activated, and this effect that he describes is all at the level of consciousness. This person is at initial stages. He might have worked well in meditative practices, but when he encountered spiritual practice, he totally, accidentally got into the tunneling effect. It's an unusual state, so primary consciousness gives a signal of falling because it really feels itself falling. Personality begins to finance that, and secondary consciousness gets activated. And what happens? An illusion. Fear arises. There is an activity of consciousness and panic. Also, there's a little nuance here. Secondary consciousness always tries to keep a person in this state as long as possible. But here, my friends, if someone gets into such an effect, you should remember and understand. You should even know before engaging in such things that when consciousness creates an illusion, there is nothing threatening or frightening. People say, "How can I get out?" Easily. There are two simple rules. Since this practice doesn't take place in reality, but only at the level of consciousness, a person controls himself. He can feel himself even as a body. That's the very point. He feels as if he is in his body, but at the same time, he's not quite in the body because he's in the tunnel. Yet, a person controls everything in this case. In what way? Consciousness draws an illusion for him, but he also perceives himself not only as a subject, but also as an object. Guys, it's enough to take a deep breath and just relax. Just to come out of this state. This is very simple. Or, for those who are brave, there's also a very good point. When you feel that you are falling and fear arises, you should intensify and accelerate the falling. In other words, you should step over what your consciousness is against and what it frightens you with. Intensify the moment of falling, and you will wake up where you are. And then just start anew. As long as you are in this state, it's impossible to maintain contact with the spiritual world. That very lotus will not work. There will be no contact inside. Why? Because secondary consciousness, which dominates over personality, is too active. This also indicates that the person is only in the process of gaining freedom as personality. These are the first steps on the spiritual path. Then it does happen. But if a person has at least some experience, he passes it all easily. Well, again, if we go back to the tunneling practice, it has been performed since ancient times for various purposes. In one of the videos, we mentioned that such personalities as Bartini used it as a tool. And indeed, it's a great tool. There, you can take any image, especially if you deal with something, or study something, some technical matters, or something else. You invest enough attention in that study, and in this practice, everything that you knew can form itself in three-dimensionality, and you can study it all in detail.
People also describe that at the moment of tunneling, they encounter such a thing that they see various entrances, exits, and labyrinths.
Right. There is such a thing here too. Here, the more a person is inclined to magic, the more labyrinths consciousness creates. Why? These are like moments of distraction.
Sort of a guard.
And whether a person wants it or not, when he is in that very tunnel, when performing a practice, he anyway pays attention to various offshoots, various bends. He sort of feels that there is light somewhere, but there are also turns and everything else. So here, when he invests attention and feels that there is something in every offshoot, it's enough for him to put his attention, to become interested in something, and he already gets into an offshoot. These are tricks of consciousness. Whereas if a person is on the spiritual path, if he really strives only for spiritual growth, then all the offshoots disappear, and the tunnel is very straight and clear because a person has a goal, and he finances only this goal with his attention. Whatever consciousness gives him, he just doesn't finance and doesn't perceive it. Therefore, there is no exit. Consciousness, everything works as it should. Whereas, if a person already has a sufficient spiritual experience, he has no tunnel at all. Even when this practice is performed, it's like passing through light. But in this case, yes, in this case.
Like through some kind of a ring, right?
Through a portal. I would even say yes. You just say as through a ring. Well, it is really perceived as through a ring of light. And this very effect obviously served as that very prototype, so science fiction writers started describing it as some kind of a ring in which a portal is formed. In reality, a portal cannot be created in any enclosed space, all the more in a ring or in something else.
So it's impossible to create anything like that in three-dimensionality.
In three-dimensionality, no. Well, how is it perceived from the standpoint of our science? We can create a certain field in a certain point. Hence, there has to be some device that opens a portal, a similar device somewhere else, and so on. While in actual fact, it's not the case. There have to be several devices directed to one point. Then a portal is created in space. And it is perceived in a completely different way. It is perceived like in any point in space, simply a burst of energy takes place.
A flash.
So why a flash? A flash. Yes, indeed, it is perceived as a flash. And why does a flash form? Because there is a huge surge of energy that excites the molecules which make up our atmosphere. Naturally, a release of energy is both light and heat and whatnot. So it's a natural effect. But if we confine it in some kind of a ring, we will not create that. Why? Because a three-dimensional object should be created, while there, it would be two-dimensional. A two-dimensional object will not work in three-dimensionality. A simple answer. I had a recording on my phone. Unfortunately, when I changed phones, that recording was lost. But many of our friends saw it. There was actually an effect where there was a flash in the sky. And out of that flash, out of that light, there appeared a bright and light object that flew a certain distance, turned around, began to fly back, and then faded away. In other words, this is precisely how a portal works.
It's very interesting.
The recording was there. It was real. And many of our friends saw it, I repeat. But as I changed my phone, it was lost somehow.
It is very interesting. Igor Mikhailovich, there is another point about tunneling. A question from people. If one and the same person, while doing a spiritual practice several times, gets into the tunneling phase over and over again, how to help him or her? What can be recommended? And does the dominance of consciousness during the day affect this?
Of course it does. Again, if a person is distracted during the day, if he is not attuned to the spiritual, if this fire in him is not burning, if he is distracted by everyday life or something else, this is life. Then afterwards, when he sits down to practice, he tries to kindle this inner fire in himself, this aspiration for the spiritual, and immediately begins to perform a practice. There will always be activeness of consciousness. So naturally, he may have problems with the practice of tunneling, as well as with any other practice. That's why it is said that if a person has embarked on the spiritual path, there is no room for hesitations or doubts or anything else. And it's important to constantly intensify and kindle this fire. You shouldn't lose it. If you feel that it is fading, that it is boring for you to love or something else, then pardon me, you should immediately perform a practice.
Oh, by the way, there is such a topic that love is seemingly always there. It was there yesterday, it is today, and it will be tomorrow. And people also notice that at a certain point, this feeling love becomes sort of routine.
Consciousness begins to tell you that it's all habitual.
It is sort of slightly in the background. It seems to be there, but not so vibrant anymore, not so intense.
And that's where trouble is creeping in. If a person feels that his interest is subsiding, and even his desire begins to disappear, if it becomes routine, this indicates the activeness of consciousness. This indicates that the person is already leaving this state. It is not love that subsides, not the feeling of happiness and joy that disappears, but you as personality leave this state of freedom and joy, of contact with the spiritual world, and you come under the power of Satan. Speaking in religious terms, or consciousness begins to take over this initiative from personality and enslave it. And if you linger in this state a little bit more, what will happen? You already observe yourself from the position of consciousness. You already perceive three-dimensionality routinely. Consciousness is me. Thoughts are mine. I'm an ordinary person. The spiritual world doesn't exist. It's all fairy tales. It's all sectarianism and nonsense. Right? Experience is gone. Although you had it. Just recently, literally a few minutes ago, you were in contact with the spiritual world, and that was a reality for you. And after a few minutes, after losing this, thoughts arise in you that, It was just an imagined state, some hormonal surge due to some external reasons. And you even doubt the existence of God, whether He exists or not. I don't know. After all, consciousness will never show this and will not give it in an assertive form. Everything occurs very simply. And when in such a weakened state, you try to perform a spiritual practice, will you perform it well? Will it bring the same effect as it brings when you are in close contact with the spiritual world during the day? When you are almost a part of that world, when joy and love prevail in you, when you are overfilled with life, real life, not the three-dimensional one. In three-dimensionality, you may have a lot of problems, poor health, an afraid body, but the ocean of life will be seething in you. How can you trade that for any illusion, routine, or anything else? However, at the initial stages, people often stumble over these mindsets and distractions of consciousness and simply divert from life to subpersonality, exchanging their life for an illusion. Again, why can't you immediately return to the spiritual state, to the state of this love and proximity of the spiritual world? When consciousness has distracted you, it turns out that, I don't know, it's as if burrs stuck to you. So, to put it simply, imagine a mouse that has barely squeezed through some crevice and cannot get back. Therefore, in order to return to the natural state, you have to choose whether to pick up those burrs or not. It's funny, but that's the truth of life.
Right.
You know, it sounds funny, but when people get into such conditions, it's really hard for them. They remember, just recently, I was in contact with God.
Right. How to return.
But now, I'm full of doubts, and I feel bad. And now someone took me and pulled me out of something good. No one actually pulls you out, my friend. In fact, you went on your own, just like that mouse, tempted by the smell of cheese. What? What can distract a person except pridefulness and stupidity? Nothing. You should approach this in a sensible and mature way. The spiritual path is not entertainment. It's not a game. It is life. It is responsibility. It is maturation. First and foremost, isn't it? How can you approach this irresponsibly, with dabbling and playing around? We actually approach work responsibly. I don't know, we even approach eating responsibly. Everything is approached responsibly, except our own spiritual growth. While here, we are like in a computer game. We played a little bit, had a little bit of fun, and God will grant, God will do. I understand that these are mindsets that have existed over millennia. People have been brainwashed by those priests and whatnot. But excuse me, what about the inner feeling? After all, everyone feels and understands how to do things the right way. Consciousness suggests stupid things, but inside, a human as personality feels, he understands the information that comes from the soul, from the spiritual world. For there can be no lies here. And it absolutely corresponds to what the prophets spoke about, or to what we are speaking about now. For we speak from the soul, not from consciousness. We don't need anything from you, unlike others who tell you in order to gain some personal benefit. Isn't that so? Even that very consciousness, what does it lie for, after all? For personal benefit. In order to take energy from personality, in order to immobilize a person, in order to make him, excuse me, a pack animal, on which consciousness will ride into its own longevity. There is no other way to call it. Like a pack animal, a person will suffer as a subpersonality. Meanwhile, for consciousness, it is energy, it is life. Again, it will continue mocking a human as personality, except that he will already realize that he is personality, and that consciousness is not him. Then this understanding will no longer be of any use. The understanding should be when you make a decision and you can change something. When the fight is over, later on, you realize that you should have dodged. You know, when your nose is smashed and you think you should have dodged, it's already too late. You should already go to specialists and have your nose fixed, right? In order not to fix it later. But if a person, God forbid, becomes a subpersonality, you cannot fix anything anymore. That's why you shouldn't allow this to happen. You only live once. It's like a sapper, you know. You mustn't make a mistake. And each of us knows how to walk this path correctly, how not to step on a mine. Everyone knows. Yet, we act out of temptation. out of stupidity, in a completely opposite way at times. And this is even, I would say, against nature. It's against nature. It is against everything. Our instinct of self-preservation is dulled. Well, that's totally inconceivable. If we think about it sensibly, how a person destroys himself, it's unacceptable after all. It is merely consciousness. When a person knows what consciousness is, how will he believe a liar or someone who constantly strives for domination? In no way. It's like believing that a corruptionist won't steal. Of course he will. Why? Such is his essence. Give or create conditions and anyone would steal. Isn't that so? Such is the world. He says, if I don't steal, someone else will come and steal. That's why they steal. It's the same in this case. It is necessary to change everything, to change it in yourself first and foremost, to be honest with yourself, and, of course, to fight for your existence. But it's the most pleasant fight there can be. Because a person's fight against Satan is precisely not in confrontation, not in a battle, not in a duel, not in torment, but in joy and love for the spiritual world. When you have stepped over the demon and tried to embrace the entire spiritual world, then it begins to embrace you too. That's a fight. That's the most pleasant war there can be. But if you confront it, it tells you one thing. While you try to respond to consciousness with some other arguments, who responds for you? And who gives you those arguments? You as personality merely fund these chatterboxes while they pack your things and buy you a ticket to a sub-personality. As long as you fund them, you should think. But in this case, you should feel, not to close the gate of your soul, but to keep it open. Then everything will be fine, right? Everything is very simple. Everything begins with love and respect. And again, with motivation, right? Motivation to live or motivation to die. Whom you listen to, that's who you will be. Unfortunately, but that's the way it is.
Also, Igor Mikhailovich, I recall a moment from the experience of Siluan the Athanai. Before he took monastic vows, when he was Simeon, he described a story when one day his cell was suddenly filled with light, which permeated even his body. And a thought flashed through his mind that this is grace accepted. He doubted that, and after that moment, demons started appearing to him, telling him that you are a saint, and then saying you won't be saved. And at one point he says, I asked them a question. Why do you sometimes convince me that I am a saint, and sometimes that I won't be saved? And they told him, we never tell the truth.
Do you know what the wonderful thing is? That anyone who embarks on the spiritual path and begins to pay at least a little bit of attention to his consciousness, how it works, how it lies to him, he encounters what Siluan the Athanite encountered too. As a practitioner, he described the reality which everyone goes through. It's impossible not to go through it. And what is also important, if you ask it a straightforward question, the system itself will confirm that it is always lying. After all, demons always lie, such is their function, and they don't deny that. That's what the paradox lies in. Yet people continue to believe them, even after receiving this answer, and sometimes many would even argue that it didn't happen, and they didn't hear it. That is, consciousness is able to block it all. But when it already occurs at a higher level, then primary consciousness denies and says that it didn't happen, and secondary consciousness tries to cover it all up, but a human, as personality, remembers it all. Yet, why does he not take it seriously? A paradox. Where is a critical approach? Because as soon as love has weakened in you, as soon as that spark has disappeared in you, what happens? The material world becomes very significant and important for you. There immediately emerges egoism. There immediately arises pride and hatred in you for everyone and everything. And sometimes it gets to the point where a person not just doubts, but simply starts hating. Something appears in him that doesn't perceive the spiritual in any form whatsoever. Isn't that so? But there remains a huge longing for what? For magic, for power. If God existed, He would give me. He would give me some material benefits, something else, wealth, power, and the like.
In regard to power, many people also say this person's prayer is very powerful, or there is a powerful saint. So it turns out that there are some weak saints too?
According to this logic, it turns out that there are. After all, it is consciousness that divides. How does it perceive, and what does it mean by a powerful prayer? Well, my friends, what do you think a powerful prayer is? And consciousness of 99.9% of people will say, a powerful prayer is one that cures a disease. For example, you've prayed, you have a powerful prayer, a secret prayer, some priest sold it to you for $20. So you keep it, pass it down from generation to generation. But this prayer, if performed correctly, can cure a sick person. Or you pray and you'll find money on the road, for example. Or you prayed and your boss started treating you better.
Even about reconciliation, yes.
Or even better, you prayed and the boss fell ill. That's even better. Those are the most powerful prayers. And the most powerful one is when you prayed and your neighbor's cow died or his car broke down. Those are powerful prayers. Isn't that so? Isn't that what you want, my friends? Not you, your consciousness. And many fall for that. And do you know who a powerful saint is? You come, give him money or a bribe of some kind. We have a world of corruption after all. And that's it. The saint prays for you. You come home and your car that was broken is already undamaged. You see?
The issues have been resolved.
The issues have been resolved, yes. Or let's say you have a computer. Rogue hackers put viruses into your computer with some program. And you don't know what to do. You go to a powerful saint, he prays, you come home, and that's it. There are no viruses on your computer. He's a powerful saint. Whereas if he cannot remove viruses from your computer, then he's a weak saint, right? Isn't that so? What do we measure by? We actually measure holiness by consumerism, by our own personal gain in the material world. But is it possible to correlate these things in any way?
No, of course not.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
What is a genuine, powerful prayer?
It is the one that brings you closer to God. That prayer is powerful. But a prayer won't bring you closer, and a mantra won't bring you closer. It's a spiritual practice that will. So, no matter what anyone says, I understand that particularly the priestly class, or people who fanatically believe, can be offended to hear this. How come a prayer? What is a prayer? What is a mantra? It's a set of sounds that no one hears or understands except you, no matter what you mutter in your head. However, when in spiritual practice you open yourself up before the spiritual world and really send your love, then you hear it in response. Prayer can lead to spiritual practice, and a mantra can lead to spiritual practice. But only spiritual practice works. Not just chatter, either in your head or with your tongue. You can chatter from morning till night, nothing will work.
You've said that some fanatical believers might be offended, but it's because they don't really delve deeply into their religion.
What for?
That is why Isaac the Syrian, by the way, also wrote, the movements of the tongue and heart in prayer are keys, and after that there is already the entrance to the innermost cages. Here let every mouth, every tongue be silent, so all this disappears.
Because all this is consciousness, while consciousness won't get into the spiritual world in any way. I mean, heaven is closed to Satan and his demons, while our consciousness is demons, if we put it in religious terms. Isn't that so? And who didn't talk about that? Didn't the prophets say that? They did. Didn't the saints who went and lived through it all, who themselves learned it from their experience in all religions, say that? Isn't that so? It is. Well, you know, fanatics, there are people who believe in God. There are people who know God. People who know God are those who were called saints, who really comprehended, not those magicians who cured bellies with prayer, but real saints who were in contact with God, with the spiritual world, and lived by it. They knew this. They talked about it. And they had their personal experience of going through it. But fanatics are those people who, I'll put it this way, they are afraid of God and afraid of the after-death fate. Most likely, many experience this because they have active subpersonalities, and they do perceive information from the experience of those dead who are in the state of subpersonality, and they coexist involuntarily together. So this after-death experience of others obviously affects them as well. They do not want such a fate, but their consciousness is too active, or there are too many subpersonalities, and very little light reaches them. They feel they understand, they are afraid, but they don't want to embark on the spiritual path. Why? They are prone to magic. As a rule, these people, fanatics, are prone to perform some theatrical actions in our daily life. So they come, and priests tell them, get up in the morning, read that prayer, light something or do something, or turn that direction and do something in the evening, or do it more times, and that's it. In other words, they automatically perform some external rituals, but do not engage in anything spiritual at all. And they do not come even a millimeter closer to God. Isn't that so? But they sincerely believe that these magic actions, which they perform during the day, open the way to heaven for them. And they will reject any knowledge which can really lead them to God, but which contradicts their magical rituals. And they will perceive this with anger. It is not their fault, but it's the fault of those demons who deceive them. Those demons perceive it all with hatred and rejection. Why? Because a person may get spiritually saved, while for a demon that means death. Whereas when a person transitions into a state of subpersonality, it prolongs the existence of that imp. It is beneficial for the imp, isn't it? It is beneficial. Everybody wants to live. That's why it happens. As for fanatics, unfortunately, they are actually ritualists. There's no other way to say it. A ritual is the most important thing for them. That's what leads them to some kind of salvation. Salvation from what? From life. Guys, only God leads to salvation, while everything else is nonsense. Magic hasn't saved anyone. Isn't that true?
It is. The more a person is guided by consumerist thinking, the more he denies any grains that are available in his religion, grains described in that very Allatra knowledge. So all this is...
You've just mentioned Allatra. Do you know why Allatra will never become a religion?
Why?
Because there's nothing to trade in Allatra. This is really so. Yes, you can turn Allatra into a religion, but then you'll have to change everything. In that case, you'll have to introduce a lot of magic and ritualism in it, and then it may become like a religious organization, but this requires a lot of effort. Whereas today, Allatra is open and simple. What can be sold there, and how can you sell it if it is freely available? Also, an essential point is that all religions are built on the idea that there is someone who can give you something, who can do something for you, pray for you, perform a magic ritual, and you will automatically get into paradise. There is no such thing, and there cannot be. Meanwhile, Allatra actually says that a person himself should do his best. Only a person himself can enter paradise. No one will push or shove him in there. Didn't all the prophets really speak about this? They did. There is such a notion as freedom of choice. A person himself chooses to live or to die, right? Therefore, Allatra cannot be a tool of religious enslavement of the masses.
Igor Mikhailovich, there is also another question. In your answer, you've just mentioned that daily practices are performed.
Yes.
In various religions, there is sort of a trend to perform regular daily practices.
In all religions.
In all of them. The Mass 5 times a day, prayer in the morning and in the evening.
Right. Just look. May I explain? I understand what you're saying, but I'll explain from the perspective of magic and, zombification of your consciousness. Friends, daily performance of certain magic rituals with a mantra. Notice, I'm not saying spiritual practices or something else. I'm saying magic rites, rituals with a certain verbal mantra, which is uttered both verbally and, let's say, at the level of consciousness, right? What does it lead to? Precisely to formation of fanaticism and hope that this ritual, which you perform with reluctance and unwillingness, you do it fast, just for the sake of doing it. Will it lead you to God? A simple question. Friends, isn't that true? You can even stand on your head from morning till night. Only God's love leads to God, doesn't it? You've just mentioned Islam, where they perform namaz 5 times. Yes, it is prescribed to perform it 5 times with a certain action, an external ritual and all the rest. Where was this action and this ritual taken from? They spied upon the Prophet and described it. Yet how many times did the Prophet perform practice?
It is written that he did it a lot of times.
Right.
That there were many additional prayers besides.
Right, but he told people to perform namaz at least 5 times, at least. And what did he say about namaz? And how did he perform it? After all, the difference is huge. He was asked, why do you do that, right?
Yes, why do you pray? A person said, you are actually already forgiven of all your sins. So why do you do that? Because he did a lot of additional rakats, both at night and before morning duties, before morning namaz, up to the point that it was mentioned that even his legs swelled from how long he prayed.
It is merely a body. And did he actually pray? He lived. He already lived, and he was at home. He came here from there to fulfill that mission which he was fulfilling. While there, he was at home. There, he was in love, in joy. He was in unity with the spiritual world. How can you not want that? After all, every minute, every moment that you can devote to coming to what you love, to what is the most precious, to that which gives happiness and life. It even doesn't give, it is happiness and life. It is infinite and joyful. So how can you not want to be there? A simple question. Only liars do not want that. Only liars perform the practice, pardon me, like a magic ritual. Isn't that so? Let's recall Jesus Christ. How much time he spent and how long he was in contact. Any minute, any moment. He came here from there. But it's not like he went there from here. That's the difference. Let's recall saints who, went out of there just to feed and take care of their bodies. They had to. And they yearned being here. They yearned and suffered because they had to come out of there and take care of their bodies. Because there's a law. As long as your body is living, you are with it. And a person has no right to shorten the life of his body. Isn't that so? It is.
Of course, against this background, it is ridiculous to hear some people say, regarding everyday performance of spiritual practices, well, I do practices during the day, so why would I also do them at a certain time?
Right, but let's begin with the fact that many people who even embark on the spiritual path and even start doing spiritual practices eventually abandon them. What for? Why would a person perform a spiritual practice? After all, he already has an experience of being in contact with the spiritual world, right? Or an agreement with the devil. That's the question. They agreed on parity. The devil doesn't interfere with his life, doesn't bother him too much, while a person doesn't perform spiritual practice so as not to tease the devil and lives happily in his own illusion and selfishness. Sort of a subpersonality with 2 legs, who has supposedly made an agreement with someone. What's the point of performing practice? He's already a bodhisattva. He once saw and felt something. The world is known. What for? Already a priori.
The lotus is already known.
Yes, let's touch upon bodhisattva. How long was Buddha in practice? Always. Whenever he had an opportunity. Isn't it true? How can you be here for even a minute when there is an opportunity to be there? Here's a simple question. If you truly love, if it is valuable to you, any parting is actually anguish. It is pain and suffering because what you love is not near you. Isn't that so? But if parting doesn't bother you, what kind of love are you talking about? Am I not right? You know, I would compare it so that people who have no experience in practice would understand. It's like diving when you hold your breath. Those who know what it is, it's when you take a deep breath, dive and stay underwater for as long as you can without breathing. So, for those who really love God, for those who really live by the spiritual world and have to reside and serve the spiritual world here, they actually breathe there, while here they stay, holding their breath. It is hard for them to breathe here, just as it is hard for a person underwater. So there, he draws in air when diving here and does what he has to do. Just for understanding, I believe it is clear why that very prophet, peace be upon him, as they say, why he spent so much time on spiritual practices. He didn't spend time on spiritual practices, he lived. He spent his time when he came into this world holding his breath in order to teach people something, to convey what he knows, so that people could get saved, so that they could gain life. That's the point. And he tried to teach people so that they could understand, at least a little bit, what love is and what life is. And in fact, thanks to him and other prophets, a lot of people became saved. A lot of people gained life. And it continues to this day. Their contribution is very significant.
He actually said, "Shouldn't I be grateful to God?" That is why he described that these very spiritual practices are better than this world and everything in this world.
Of course, they are better than this world. How can it be otherwise? He actually expressed his gratitude to the spiritual world. He expressed his gratitude to Allah Himself for giving him life. Or to go back to this routine where there are lies, filth, death, diseases, and hatred towards each other, to see and perceive all this, to hear the pain and suffering of people, of those who are in slavery of consciousness. They moan, whine, and cry for help, but do nothing at that. And they continue being slaves to consciousness. They crave magic, they crave power, they crave profit. How did that make him feel? Or to be before the face of Allah? Well, it's hard to understand and express it in this three-dimensionality, but these things cannot be compared in fact. Therefore, naturally, the prophet, just like other prophets and people who gained life, those whom we call saints, true saints, all of them went through that. Yet, there is another but. When you have gained life, or you've just experienced it, when you help someone else to gain it, there are already two of you. This collective diving cannot be compared to anything at all. Of course, it gives joy and pleasure. That's exactly the meaning of service. And the greater number of people dive, the more there is love and joy, and the more sense it makes.
Yes, like waves in one ocean, it is unclear where one wave ends and where another wave begins. Everything is one.
It shouldn't end. It is simply life.
Igor Mikhailovich, another question. You said that some people, the devil stops them, saying, well, you are comfortable as you are, don't perform spiritual practices. I would also like to raise this question. We have received a lot of letters which in one way or another have in common such a request that a person would like to have a comfortable spiritual path.
What does it mean, a comfortable spiritual path?
So that the system wouldn't pressure a person too much, let's say, so that it wouldn't attack him too much, for example.
Then they should go into magic. Then the system will roll out a red carpet in front of them. People will worship them, give them gifts, and respect them. When you embark on the spiritual path, my friend, prepare to be spat not only on your back, but also in your face. Prepare to be hated even by your relatives and friends. But this is three-dimensionality, in which you stay for a very short period of time, where magic reigns, and where there is power of Satan. For now, it depends on us whether it will be kept at the same level or not. It depends on us, all the people, and on you, my friend. But if you have embarked on the spiritual path, prepare yourself for problems in this world and for love in that world. So what do you choose? Eternal life in love with God in the spiritual world, or peace and respect in this world? Yes, afterwards, when you become invisible to the system, it pretends that you do not exist. Yes, there comes peace, a normal routine, ordinary human life. Although, it's not always so. Any moves you make against the system, and the system starts fighting. Isn't that so? Well, there are a few examples that precisely show how life changes for those people who actually embark, not just on the spiritual path, but on the path of service. Here too, guys, there's a difference. If a person simply embarks on the spiritual path, yes, the system creates difficulties, but sometimes not too severe, so to speak. Although again, if there is a prospect of serving the spiritual world, and that means taking something, some power away from the system, therefore, it resists. Here's a trivial example. We have a wonderful good friend. He did that which many people are incapable of. Let's say, if 1 million people were in his circumstance, they wouldn't do that. While he was 1 million first, and he did it, and he really changed this world. In terms of spiritual significance, of course, he has deserved a place in heaven. But there is one problem. A person has to enter the spiritual world on his own. But he has deserved peace 100%. What does this mean? This means a totally inactive subpersonality. In other words, he can no longer fear death. And this feat of his, a real human feat, is very significant. But the system doesn't sleep either. This person engaged in spiritual practices, in developing himself, yet he is a human being. Until he gains life, a human is weak. And it turned out that after he had done, I emphasize, the greatest deed for humanity, he began to doubt. That is, his consciousness started throwing doubts to him. Whether he did the right thing, whether what he did was relevant, whether it was necessary, and so forth. He as a human being started listening and unfolding these thoughts. He is actually a very clever and strong person, internally strong, but hesitations arose in him. These hesitations and doubts led to increased pressure from the system, and it created problems at his work. He began to lose friends, those whom he considered to be his friends. While he was on top and had a status, you know how it is. He had many friends. They were loyal and faithful, but then they turned their backs on him. They don't pick up the phone and pretend they do not know him. It's a jab at selfishness. A serious jab. So a half-depressive state arose in the person. In a situation where he needed to show commitment and take another step towards helping people. Reluctance, hesitation, sort of inner weakness emerged in him. Although he's a very strong person, my friends, and he began to have even more problems at work and at home. Excessive self-criticism arose in him, and this kind of fuss has been taking place. He has been struggling for a long time already, but he's a very strong person, and he has a chance to take a step, look into Satan's eyes, and just step over him. And then the world will change. But that's his choice. Why am I saying this? Because even strong people who have done a lot find themselves in a situation where the system really deceives them. It makes them doubt even God, everything. Well, God. It's easy for a person to start doubting God. The system starts making him doubt himself. It destabilizes him to the utmost. Or there's another example, which, currently, we also have a good friend. A serious responsibility lies on him, and he has undertaken it. This can help a lot of people and even affect the world in general. But as soon as he took on that burden, let's put it this way, manifestation of magic began from all sides. His near and dear people started having health problems. One surgery after another, accidents, problems in business, loss of profits, and that kind of things.
The standard package of the system.
The standard package of the system. Those who have actually encountered it, they know how it works.
The starter pack.
The starter pack of the system, exactly.
On the path of service.
So it begins to unpack. Yes, the most interesting thing is that they know that they shouldn't give in, both the first fellow and the second fellow. They knew that it could happen. The first one was even warned about it, you know? When a person is in joy, when he's happy, when he is strong, when you warn him about it, he says, I will handle it. But when he falls under the power of the system, he doesn't even realize that he is in slavery. He feels it, but inner fear begins to overcome even his strength. Why have I told you that? I'm precisely telling you how the system works. And there's the third one. I'll give you an example. Many people know about him, but many don't. Let's say another good friend of ours also undertook something very important for the spiritual world, because this eventually led to raising and stirring a lot of people up and giving a lot of people a chance. Naturally, this weakened the system. So, when he took on this kind of service, he began to have enormous problems, and very quickly at that. The first thing that happened was that he got into an accident. The accident was serious. The car was smashed to pieces, and it wasn't his fault. The case was a little bit disputable, but it wasn't his fault. However, the other car was driven by silver spooners, as they say nowadays, that is, children of high-ranking officials. Naturally, he was immediately blamed for the accident. Moreover, he tried to defend himself, to prove his point that he wasn't actually guilty. But justice is on the side of powerful people, and everyone knows that. He immediately began to have serious problems with his business. And not just business, but out of nowhere, there arose problems that put him under a criminal article. The proceedings were underway, and the situation was such that soon he would be put into jail. It's clear that everything was arrested. At that, he had a child, a girl, who at that time was in her 5th year. She was 4 years old. It was her 5th year. Suddenly, she fell ill. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And all of this hit the person simultaneously. Plus, his spouse freaked out, his family was a mess, and his friends disappeared. Everything is as usual, as you say, the starter pack. But given what he did, what he had to do back then, the system gave him such an expanded package with an extension.
He got under a grindstone of the system completely.
Of course. So this led him to the point where he started having suicidal thoughts. In other words, he was in total hopelessness. He couldn't solve anything anywhere. He could solve just nothing, neither the situation at work nor the situation with the criminal article, where he couldn't prove that he wasn't guilty, or with the child, where doctors didn't guarantee anything. So this whole situation was aggravating, and suicidal thoughts came. And he, as he himself described it, and many of our friends heard it all, thoughts came to him about how he started choosing a method of suicide. That is, to shoot himself, to hang himself, and so on. He and I had a conversation before that, and he heard an expression that I had often mentioned since long ago. If you don't need your life, give it to people. And this thought came to him at the moment when he already began to seriously choose a way of passing. He was actually setting deadlines for himself, a day or 2 days, that is, to say goodbye to his daughter and to do what needs to be done. And at that point, he realized, wait, since I cannot do anything, really, I just have this situation in my life. It doesn't depend on me. So do I have to kill myself? Well, if I have to kill myself, that means it won't get me anywhere, and I won't accomplish anything. Yet, I did take it on, and he recalled what he took on. So I'll go and do what I should do. I don't care about anything else, since I cannot influence that. In other words, he gave the last moments of his life to serving people. And the person indeed stepped over. He looked into Satan's eyes and took a step. Do you know what the most interesting thing is? That's where the reverse miracles began. Not magic, but miracles from God. the ones that religions later arrogate to themselves. And they begin to tell us that it's them who do this, as well as some false saints. The first thing that happened is that the child began to feel very bad and got into an oncology intensive care unit. A very reputable oncologist, a good person, came. I personally knew him. At that time, he was already very old. He examined the child and said simple words: treat the child for parasites. She has nothing to do in oncology care. 3 days later, the child set off at a run. While before that, there were all the diagnoses. Everything was there. After the child was treated in 3 days, that's it. The cancer diagnosis was removed. This is a fact from life. What happened next is even more interesting. A situation popped up where those parents of silver spooners got caught themselves, and the investigation found out, quite by accident, that he was literally framed at work. These very officials, under pressure, created a situation where he was falsely accused and his business was ruined. Everything came back to normal. And it became clear that those silver spooners were to blame for the accident. So, things sorted themselves out for him. And this man dives into practice, not just 5 times a day, but until today, he has constantly been diving almost, let's say, 50 times a day in order to breathe, and he comes up to do something good, and everything is getting better. So this man, when being so inspired, in such a spiritual state, in his conversation with me, said, "You know, I'm so imbued with this. I want to abandon everything, go to a monastery, and indeed devote all my time to God." I told him, "You know, friend, please, only not there. They'll surely spoil you there. Here you could get out of this situation and step over Satan. But if you go to a monastery, you won't get out." It's funny, but it's true. Yet, as of today, he brings joy to both the spiritual world and to people who follow the spiritual path. At this point, guys, I want to say, you know, without any jokes, without anything, remember one thing. If you merely show that potential, your spirituality, that you can become somebody, the system often doesn't overlook that. It starts attacking. If you pay attention to this and don't step over it, the system can create many problems. If you react to this, the problems will intensify. If you get distracted from the spiritual path and instead of generating love, you begin to invest all the attention that you should have been putting into your spiritual development into generating fears and doubts for yourself, the system will increase the pressure. It's natural to turn you as a future angel into a subpersonality right now. Remember this. But remember something else as well. If you feel that you don't need your life, give it to people. Devote it to serving people. I'm not talking about serving the spiritual world. That would be better and more correct, but not everyone is able to do that. But at least devote this life to people. Everyone is capable of that. Even atheists. Even those who don't believe or hate God, but who love people. This will already be a good thing and will weigh in a person's favor. I'll give you a simple example. Imagine fish in a river. Some fish behave like sick fish. They don't offer resistance. They flow along the river where the water flows. What will happen to them? They will get weaker, get sick, and die. Isn't that so? Other fish are hiding somewhere in the backwater, somewhere behind a little stone, so that the current doesn't resist them, and they are precisely in this environment where it is calm and quiet. But remember, this is where all the rot, all the dead stuff, and all the filth comes in. It stagnates there, and will not give life either. Yet, there are fish that despite the current, despite the force of the current, swim against the current in clear waters. These fish are healthy and strong, but they are free and can swim in any direction they wish, instead of hiding somewhere in a backwater behind a stone, amidst the rot, or excuse me, giving their bodies to the river of time, which merely carries them along the rocks and reeds, like ordinary trash. Is this actually life? Life is when you choose where to swim, and it doesn't matter if the current of waters flowing towards you is strong or not. If you are a fighter, the river is not a hindrance for you, my friend. You choose where to swim. That's the point. I would encourage you, friends, to be healthy and strong fish, to look into Satan's eyes when he creates problems for you, to step over, and despite all the resistance of this river of life, to swim against the current towards your goal, simply without straying. Then everything will be fine. And then you'll get where you want to arrive, if, of course, your goal is worthy of it. Guys, everything is very simple in this world. Very simple. Anything can be doubted. Consciousness always resists and always criticizes. And remember one more thing. If your consciousness criticizes something, if it questions God, then you are worth something. It means you have a chance for spiritual salvation. But if it pushes you into some religion or somewhere else and says, it's good there, you don't have to do anything there, you just perform a ritual, then think, just think, that external actions do not give inner life. Your body is mortal, but you can gain life, eternal, because a human is not a body. A human is much more than that. Remember this.
Igor Mikhailovich, why is it that when a person is on the path of gaining life, he doesn't notice the moment when he loses contact with the spiritual world,
I understand.
when he gets out of the state?
Today, you are inspired. You got a lot somewhere. And it's like the sun inside of you today and tomorrow. But the day after tomorrow, something distracts you. You no longer redirect your attention to maintain the fire inside, but you redirect it to the outside, to simple conversations or something else routine. You get carried away by this routine, and your attention flows there. And later on you look, it seems to be warm, but there is no happiness. And it seems that joy is not the same anymore. Yet, a lot more problems arise, and they need to be urgently solved. You don't care anymore about spiritual practice. You're going to perform it tomorrow or tonight. Yet, the evening comes, but you are tired after the day, so you will do it in the morning. You see? So, you postpone. You postpone it once, postpone it twice, and then there is already coldness inside you. And you realize that you are nowhere, that you are attacked by consciousness, that you are in slavery, you are in three-dimensionality, you are depressed and sad, and consciousness immediately begins to accuse you, adding, as it is said, oil to the fire, yet not to that inner fire, but to the outer fire. And it starts blaming you for everything, and telling you that you are not worthy, and you'll never succeed, right? Yet why does this happen? Because a person deviates and doesn't notice this phenomenon. You know, I'll give a simple example for those who know. When they had experience, or at least can imagine, you are sitting in a sauna, you're well warmed up, then you jump out and dive into a cold ice hole, or into a pool with cold water. Are you still hot?
Yes, so far.
And it takes time to cool off. So when you stay in the ice hole, or in the pool a little bit longer, your body cools off. The heat goes down, and that's when you realize that you are cold. Right?
But not at once, not at that moment.
But not at once. Why? Because when you leave the sauna, your body still radiates heat. The same is in this case. When you move away from the spiritual world and break this connection, there is still plenty of Alat in you. You still shine with it. And it seems to you that it's already yours. But it is no longer yours, you see? There is no contact anymore. That heat is already taken away by the external environment. And in this case, if we speak about spiritual growth, that's what demons already take away. You simply pass it on to them. And along with your spiritual development, along with your Alat, and along with your prospects, they also take away your life and your freedom. That's the point. I'm not saying you should sit in the sauna. Don't take this literally. It was an associative example. For people might say, you should take steam baths to be spiritual. Guys, well, if it helps you, for God's sake, take steam baths.
Therefore, one should constantly abide in God's love.
Always.
You know, in Orthodoxy, there is the practice of Jesus' prayer when a person is in incessant contact with God, with the spiritual world.
And you were saying, the final phrase, what it is supposed to lead to. What does it begin with? With prayer, with mantra, with words, with an intention. The very first thing it begins with is a person's need to reunite with the spiritual world. Then there arises what? An intention. After the need, and then a person takes Jesus' prayer as a tool. But the tool is, well, I would compare Jesus' prayer with the lotus practice because it goes through all the phases. If we consider it simply in practice, let's say, in everyday life, putting aside all kinds of religiousness, then in order for a person to really come to God, he has to go through several stages. When he breaks out of this everyday routine, this is at least to understand how consciousness works and to calm it down. It's autogenic training. Then he should figure out the functions of consciousness. These are, let's say, meditative practices, simple, usual practices. And then he should already maintain contact with the spiritual world, revive in himself. So to say, nurture and sprout God's love. Those are already spiritual practices. So, in Christianity, Jesus' prayer fulfills all these three functions. It's the same. What does a person do first? Experiencing a thirst and an aspiration, he creates an intention. He undertakes to perform Jesus' prayer. And with simple and clear words, he's in incessant contact, approaching Jesus Christ, meaning the spiritual world. Yes, in Christianity, this has been personalized and presented sort of separately. But who is Jesus Christ? He is a part of the spiritual world, isn't he? Therefore, when striving for him, you will anyway get into God's embrace, as they say. This is the path which really leads there. Yet, what does it require? Constant devotion. It means the maximum of your attention, which you invest where? In love, in unity, and in joy. Isn't it so? That's what the prayer actually leads to. But if you perform it at the level of chatter, at the level of conversation, and you expect a magic miracle, that an insight will be suddenly revealed to you, that will not happen. Again, if we take those people who practiced Jesus' prayer, and actually there are not so many people who attained spiritual freedom, when they described all this, they went through all these stages, Satan's attacks and everything else. Well, that's in religious terms a little bit, but it is basically the same as you and I discussed today. They had a bunch of problems. They faced hatred, their friends disappeared, they felt pain, suffering, and everything in the world. I mean, those who really practiced this prayer, isn't that so? However, unfortunately, there are those, I would say, liars from the organization who liken themselves to those people in order to attract attention to themselves. I've been among monks a lot, and I've seen many who came and said, I was practicing Jesus' prayer. I asked them, so how is it? It is such spirituality. I said, you know, with all due respect for your organization, leave this room before I help you do that. I said this several times every year to people of that kind. Why? Why did I do that? I'll explain. Exactly because you can start Jesus' prayer, but you cannot complete it until you reunite with God and become free from this perishable body and this three-dimensionality. Whereas, if someone says that he practiced and achieved, what could he achieve except illusions? Nothing. I also met those who walk around and mutter, especially men in women's clothes. When people approach, he mutters Jesus' prayer. Sort of, he is not distracted by anyone. But at the same time, he shows, put the money here, and I will pray for you later. And continues muttering. As soon as people walk away, Jesus' prayer turns into swear words. And let's be honest, who doesn't know such individuals who spit in the back of those who give them alms? Satan in all his charm. However, there were those, and I knew those who really practiced Jesus' prayer. My good friend Anthony, for example, was in this prayer from beginning all the way to freedom. He was always in it. And did it prevent him from communicating with people and doing a lot of good? No, it didn't. Nothing hindered him because this is life. This is bliss. This is love. How can love prevent a person from living? Explain it to me. Hatred hinders, but love doesn't. Friends, love gives strength. It gives joy. And here is a simple example. Unfortunately, one of the few. But it is wonderful. Jesus' prayer is just like any other spiritual practice. If a person started performing it, it cannot end. Just like the lotus, right? It's basically the same. It is similar. The only thing is that in Jesus' prayer, at the beginning, the image of Jesus Christ is used.
Words too.
Words are used. Well, it's like a mantra. In the lotus, it is that very visualization, that very image through which you go to the spiritual world. The lotus is simple. Let's say, if we remove everything, Jesus' prayer is meaningful for Christians, while the lotus is for atheists. It enables one to enter the spiritual world. It is indeed for atheists who do not believe in fairy tales or life was harsh on them. They've seen many liars and haven't seen saints in their lives. Yet, have you, my friends, seen many saints in your life? Not liars, but true saints. Here's the answer. Therefore, consciousness manipulates this before a serious choice is made to seem. Yes, we all seem to be someone in that very Christianity. Do we? As Christians, often attend God's temple. I understand there are a lot of problems. Even when we go there on Easter Day to light a candle and to have our Easter cake blessed, it's a ritual. Do we go there to serve God, or is it just a ritual? It's just a ritual that is interesting to us, isn't it?
Such is the tradition.
Such is the tradition, right? But it has nothing to do with spirituality. That's the point.
Igor Mikhailovich, also regarding the fact that in prayerful states, certainly when a person encounters changes in time and space,
Of course.
but also during the day, actually people who follow the spiritual path describe that they also encounter such things that space changes
Yes.
and perception
of,
time
right?
changes, up to the point that you are walking down the street and at a certain moment you realize that you are static while reality is moving towards you.
It is moving towards you.
Or regarding the distortion of time, people often describe that they have been in caves seemingly for a minute or two. They come out,
And they go outside.
but several hours have already passed.
Yes, it happens quite often. People do encounter such things. Yes, we can explain it from the perspective of psychology or something else. I'll put it simply. There is a point A and a point B. You steadily drive a car at a speed of, let's say, 60 kilometers from point A to point B. It takes an hour of time. But when at some moment you get distracted and say, 20 minutes of driving disappear for you, you didn't speed up or go anywhere. And there are plenty of witnesses. The car is full of passengers. It's impossible to explain this in any way, but it was enough for you to get distracted and merely think about the section where you manifested. Such things do happen, but they are harmful because, unfortunately, I think it all happens because the system loosens. It makes a glitch in its program in order to catch a person, to distract him with magic. Then, a person who is about to achieve something encounters these glitches in the very program of three-dimensionality and gets carried away by them. Instead of gaining spiritual salvation, he's already more interested in these phenomena and how to learn to control them. Thus, many people lose their spiritual path because of that. While some become interesting and strong mages, whom we know in history as saints who were far-sighted, did a lot, performed powerful prayers, gave people hope, healed them, and so on. And they fulfilled all their material requests, but in exchange, they took their lives and the prospect of future spiritual salvation, in fact.
Igor Mikhailovich, what is actually time? It seems to be a fundamental concept in physics, but neither scientists nor common people know what time is. What is time and what causes the existence of time in general?
Time. Time is closely connected with space. Why? And what is time in general? How to substantiate it?
Nikolai Kozyrev said that time and energy are actually like two sides of a whole. Let's say a single whole that has not been studied in any way.
One in the same whole. And what is a single whole? It is the time expenditure of a lot. That is, the outflow of a lot generates time and space, because the outflow of a lot is always a movement.
The speed of its expenditure.
The speed of its expenditure. Right. This is what causes time. Well, again, time. Now we have touched upon an interesting subject. Do you remember we were even going to conduct a time experiment at XPNRG? Well, let's go back to time again. Time is multifaceted. There is a unified time for the universe. Any material object becomes dependent on time and space. The duration of its existence is based on that. Yet, time itself is the speed of expenditure of a lot, or the outflow of a lot. If we take our entire universe, there's a certain amount of a lot. But it is additionally brought in by human-like beings too. There's a little phenomenon here. So, the universal time, the universal a lot, is calculated from point A to point B along the whole radius of the movement of matter, its origination, emergence, movement, and until complete annihilation. In other words, it comes to an empty state, and then everything that existed simply disappears. Space disappears, and everything else. But there's one factor that can prolong the existence of the universe. I'll digress a little bit. According to all the laws of physics, there was an explosion. Everything began to form and to fly apart. But there are laws saying that it should slow down. And it should have started slowing down a long time ago. Then, as some physicists say, it should come back together, come again to a point. Whatever. Having accelerated, it should slow down, but it only increases. So, the motion of our universe, this process of flying apart in different directions, the divergence of galaxies from each other and so on, accelerates. The question is why? Because it is conditioned by different physics, by completely different physical laws, which we don't know yet. So Kozyrev was right. Time and energy is the essence of one and the same thing, but energy and the energy of time originate exactly from the outflow of a lot. It is the transition of a lot from the material universe to what a lot is a constituent part of, meaning back to that world where it came here from. And this is the cause of the entire flow of time. But there is also individual time. In other words, time is diverse. Yes, we are all subject to the linearity of time. But, for example, let's take our Earth as a sphere. It also has its own time depending, shall we say, on the filling of what? Again, our planet is inhabited by human-like beings. Every human-like being, apart from being spiritualized, is also soul-filled. In other words, there is a source. In addition to the presence of a lot, there is also a source of that a lot, or that which we call the soul. Yes, these are microparticles, but excuse me, it's a part that has tremendous power. And when we are united in a single whole, then excuse me, we can significantly decelerate time in our sphere, while if we were united in the entire universe, we could slow down this accelerating expansion. Well, sort of the inevitable end of the universe. We could restrain it. This is a slightly different physics. We know it poorly so far. We as humanity merely start guessing, seeing, and observing something. Well, Kozyrev noticed that. Do you understand? Why? Because few people have touched upon the subject of time. Few have studied it. Why? Because they do not understand from which side to approach it. Kozyrev approached it correctly, and he understood, but previous civilizations that existed actually knew about time. Not all of them, but they knew. We can see that from echoes from the past, right?
In the Vedic culture, it is very well said that every part of the universe has its own time and every object lives in its own field of time. So every person also has his or her individual time.
Absolutely right. It's individual. A human as a sphere, a microsphere, also has the fluidity of his time. Fluidity of time. That's the point. It is all conditioned by a lot. If you remember, at XPNRG, we wanted to perform an experiment, and we're actually going to do it. But it's an experiment with time. It is clear that you can send some micro-object into the future only at an inertial distance. As for any farther distance, the linearity of time and the indeterminacy of the future would not allow you to jump any farther. As for the past, it already took place. And that's where the entire phenomenon is. In other words, from the present, we can send anyone and anything to the past, and we can go to the past ourselves and go back to the present, that is, to the moment of the present. So we wanted to do an interesting experiment, if you remember.
Yes, you mentioned it.
To send some microorganism, we were going to send an ant.
A Drosophila.
Yes, a Drosophila, or an ant. But then we decided on an ant. We wanted to return it from the future, 2 seconds or 2 minutes after that moment, to the present. And then there would appear, let's say, not in the same space, but next to each other, two exactly the same creatures.
Meaning the same creature one is younger and the other is older, right?
Right, until the first one would disappear. At the moment of the experiment, it would have gone back in time. The one that was with us. Well, isn't that interesting? It is interesting. But frankly speaking, friends, we encountered the fact that initially we thought it would be much easier to do, but it turned out that the equipment we needed was so rare and expensive that we as a company it's not in our power. Let's put it gently. However, we did find a few laboratories that had relevant equipment, and it would be possible to conduct this experiment there. But frankly speaking, no one would even talk to us. Who are we to approach them with this kind of proposal? That's why we moved away from this idea a little bit. It is very expensive and groundless. So we were sitting around thinking, what would it actually give? Yes, it is funny, it's pretty cool, and it's interesting. We will even reveal a little secret if you're participating. Well, that's for those who will start arguing. I'll just explain. For those who are interested in this, I'll explain the mechanism a little bit. The equipment should work in a way that in the future, regardless of a human, the experiment should take place. This is extremely important. Those who take part in the experiment must not influence the result of the experiment. And do you know what the best part is? Why I wanted to do this? And what is interesting? We find out about the effectiveness of the experiment before we even run it. You see? Well, there are points of interest here, of course. All equipment is set up in such a way that, regardless of our participation, it starts working and enters on its own, automatically, at the moment of the launch. Once we leave human influence, the experiment will never work and will never take place at short distances. At long distances, if we don't want to return the insect from the future to our point, but we return it from the present to the past and back, here the human factor plays no role. But if we want
From the future.
to bring something from the future back to the present on an inertial leap, again, the question will arise for many. What is this? There is time. Time flows at a certain speed, and there is a moment of inertia, of inevitability, of the fact that it will inevitably be that way during a minute or two. In 3 minutes, for example, a lot can change. I'm speaking figuratively, but there's uncertainty in that period of time, and we will not be able to do anything with uncertainty. But at the moment of inertia, the inevitability of repetition of what is happening, we can do it all. But again, only if the equipment works automatically and is set up by itself without the human factor, without human influence. Then this experiment will work.
So it doesn't exist yet, right? There isn't one. It's efficiency.
Well, yes,
For society.
it all remained in theory and so on, although we performed the experiment with time for a fraction of a second. Yet, it worked. We wanted to expand, to increase. But really, what is the significance? Yes, it's exciting, interesting, and amusing. Goodness, 1 ant, temporarily 2 ants, what difference would it make? What's the meaning for the entire humanity?
Maybe some meaning for science, for humanity.
Well, for science, for the future. Perhaps, yes, there is some meaning. We actually thought about that. We relied on it. But on the other hand, if we look at it reasonably, it is unaffordably expensive and takes a lot of time. All these settings, all this, for the sake of admiring two ants for 2 minutes, you know? It's like, we should be adults. So, when we simply couldn't physically implement this experiment, we just thought, what can we do that is good and useful? Really useful, you know? It was such a sobering moment, and we thought about doing something as a company, as XP Energy, something useful and good for the creative society. Well, what can we do that is useful for the creative society? Of course, now it's the informing stage, and it is all being done anyway. We decided to do something at the level of XP Energy. We pondered and decided to do something very useful on a large scale to really help the creative society. So, we set the bar a little higher to make it more interesting. And we created, let's say, our third development of XP Energy company. Of course, it turned out to be the simplest in terms of complexity and the least important compared to the first two. But at the same time, it can be very useful for countries, but precisely during the transition from the consumerist format to the creative one. So we've made a multi-purpose complex, Voskod, Sunrise. Yes, it sounds threatening, right?
Well, a little bit, yes, as if
Yes, the multi-purpose complex, Voskod. Well, sort of in association with something military.
military,
And threatening, yes.
probably some kind of strategic object.
Sort of a strategic one, yes. So we've done something that, contrary to its name, is actually aimed at saving lives and creatively building something. But at the same time, for instance, at the level of a country, it is actually designed for the level of united countries, several countries, or a multitude of countries. This multi-purpose complex is aimed at getting rid of the remnants of the consumerist format. After all, even with the transition from the consumerist format to the creative one, there will remain what? Embezzlement, corruption, various fights for power, and so on. In other words, all these vestiges that will continue to linger. So, this multi-purpose complex is a serious development in such a program which allows you to simply get rid of it all when it is implemented in a country during the transition period. Why? Because wrongdoings would be impossible. I will say even more. For example, if we were to use it now, as of today, even in the consumerist format, I say right away, this is almost unrealistic. Later, I will explain why. But if we use it at the level of a country, for example, in China, then, right now, this multi-purpose complex, Voskod, is capable of saving a lot of lives in China. Why? People there are shot for embezzlement and put in jail for corruption. Imagine, it's the loss of the smartest people. You know, it's like we say, here's an embezzler, a thief. Yes, he.
Such a negative imprint right away, yes.
Negative. And let's look from the other perspective, from the perspective of the creative society. The most valuable thing is human life. It is the first foundation. Yes, he's a thief. Why has he stolen? Because such conditions have been created, while a human is weak. We should approach it sensibly and correctly, facing the truth. Any person is weak. Any person is prone to what? To profiteering, to selfishness, to megalomania, and to everything else. These are human weaknesses. Until we accept this as a fact, we cannot resist it. But when we understand that a person is weak, that a person will be tempted, yes, they have a punishment. If a person is caught, he is shot. But those are the smartest people who run many industries and the like. That is, as a rule, those are even high-ranking officials. After all, they are very smart, and they believe they are so smart that they can steal from the treasury and no one will notice. That is, they will remain unpunished. And this very point of remaining unpunished is what contributes to a person's weakness. But if, for example, the multi-purpose complex Voskod is in service in China, literally in service, only to protect people's interest, then any official will understand that it's impossible to steal anything. Why? Because this complex can monitor Let's say it's an online audit of everything and everyone simultaneously throughout the entire country and even across, not even across multiple countries. That is to monitor any industry, no matter how much someone wants to steal. This complex will notice it. Moreover, it will show who did it, what was taken out, and in what ways and what was done. It sounds like science fiction, I know, but it is so. Moreover, I'm just saying, even though this development ranks third in terms of importance, this complex will be the first one that will be presented to the public. We're finishing testing it now, and we'll prepare a description, and most likely, we'll make it available to the public. There's also a bit of humor here, you know? XP Energy Company is remarkable, not only for its intelligence and ingenuity, but also for an extraordinary sense of humor. Well, I hope everyone remembers that already, right? So, we want to make a joke. Why? Because today, this is the most effective complex, the most effective tool in this fight against corruption. As you know, environmentalists are fighting against CO2, against the anthropogenic factor, and they are supposedly going to stop climate change. All countries, all politicians are fighting against what? Corruption. So we give them a tool. Friends, together with you, we've given a tool in the battle against the climate. It is the creative society. It is our tool that we've created all together. It is indeed something that can contribute to saving the whole planet and all our lives. But what do we see? We see the resistance of the CO2D students who study solely anthropogenic influences and solely CO2. Why? Because that's the only thing we can influence, they say. Meanwhile, what is the percentage of CO2 in our atmosphere?
0.04%. You know, it is simply amazing that just as consciousness narrows people down to some point, in the same way in the scientific world, you see how everyone has narrowed down to the point of this CO2, and it seems...
Anthropogenic CO2.
Anthropogenic CO2. And it seems that the entire atmosphere consists of either oxygen
or CO2
and huge CO2, while this CO2, in fact, let's say the percentage of CO2 among all the gases in the atmosphere is only 0.04%, and of that...
People just think about it. All CO2 is only 0.04% as of today. 0.04%. That's what the atmosphere is made up of.
And about 1% of that, well, somewhere they say 3%, but if we take that, it is 1%. 1% of CO2 is of anthropogenic origin, so it actually amounts to 0.0004%.
My friends, 0.0004%.
A fraction.
That has supposedly influenced climate change. And this is what they fight against. And they annually spend on it.
$632 billion in the year 2020 alone. But including funds, it is more than 635 billion. 635 billion a year.
$635 billion a year. Just imagine.
But it's not enough.
And they say it's not enough for them. And funding of these CO2 fighters should be increased to $4 trillion a year.
Yes, by the year 2030.
Guys, we have given you simple numbers for which you can simply dismiss them. Meanwhile, these 635 billion that they spend are more than enough to build the creative society within 2 years. Simply to transition already to the creative society. Within 2 years, we could turn it all around with that number. And it would be good for everyone. And it would be a guarantee of salvation for all of humanity. But will they do that? No, of course not, because some people simply put those billions into their pockets, allegedly fighting against the 0.0004% of the impact on our entire atmosphere. Allegedly, it gives something. As for the fact that this ratio doesn't play any role, no one will pay attention to that. But this ratio plays a huge role for the immunity of our planet. And that's where the truth is. You know, I have a good friend, God bless him, and he called it the air trade. And he called it, well, I won't repeat after him, but those who know, they know it. That's a great business, indeed. There is a good business on the water. And this is an even better business out of nothing, on the air. So, no matter how you twist it, it is so. It seems to me, this is one of the biggest scams of today. Distraction of attention. Ripping off of everyone they can, dictatorship, solution of political issues, and at the same time, as a nice bonus, multi-billion-dollar profits. And this is the essence of the consumerist format. Unfortunately, it is the quaint essence of inhumanity. It's like the eternal fight against corruption, which began with the Sumerians, and it has been fought against to this day. Well, CO2 is at least a new phenomenon, and it's good that it hasn't lasted for thousands of years, but only for about 40 years. But the question is whether they will end it voluntarily with such profits. The effect of consumerism. I don't think that there are no intelligent people in this world. I guess what I'm about to say has come to the minds of many people. It's just that they are not given a word, so it's not widely publicized. Let us track what is going on. After all, during every cycle, there's always an accumulation of carbon dioxide, methane, and everything else. It's like the result of warming and everything else. If we track from the beginning of warming, it's about 10 or 11 months. CO2 level begins to increase, regardless of whether there were people or not. That's the reaction of our planet. Afterwards, when warming subsides, CO2 level recedes to normal, and it all comes to an average amount. When cycles occur, CO2 rises even higher. That's clear. And now a question. Let's just think about it as intelligent people, capable of some kind of reflection. Why does this happen? And let's look at what is happening to our atmosphere. And why are trees, instead of absorbing CO2, begin to emit much more of it? Why? What is going on with the trees? Do they mutate so fast, or what? Not just in some particular place, but almost everywhere. As soon as the temperature rises, mutations begin.
Yes.
Yet, what is actually taking place? And we look, where does this CO2 go? Into the atmosphere. Where's the main reaction taking place? In the upper layers of the atmosphere. What happens? The lower layers drastically heat up, while the upper layers drastically cool down. Okay, such cooling and heating is formed. What does that lead to? Densification, right? Okay, what does densification of the atmosphere mean? If we look at those heights, the atmosphere is rarefied. That is, molecules, the molecules of gases, air, water, everything, are at a great distance from each other. And when this kind of densification occurs, they begin to compress. What do they compress for? What's the point? And why does this always coincide with the solar minimum? Why is the solar minimum formed? What restrains it? The solar minimum reduces the activity of the sun. The electromagnetic field of the sun itself weakens, and the sun produces less radiation, which means that somewhere in remote areas, after all, it protects us with both its electromagnetic field and its radiation from something that comes from the outside, right? It means that more of something starts coming from the outside, and this more of something has to pass through our atmosphere to our planet and cause something. So warming takes place. And as soon as our planet feels that more of something begins to enter it than is necessary, what does it begin to do? Protect itself. That is, the immune system is triggered. So, as a result of this immunity reaction, the ocean starts to emit more carbon dioxide. Trees start to emit more carbon dioxide. There's an accumulation of it. And such a paradox occurs, which we observe today in our atmosphere. It is very similar to the skin immunity of our bodies. It's the first defense line the planet is trying to protect itself with. But if we take this seriously and say, is this actually possible? Then it turns out that our planet is alive. My friends, since our planet is alive, then we are parasites who do not live in symbiosis. We do not help it, but pollute, kill, and torture it. And in fact, as of today, we have polluted it so badly with our garbage dumps, landfills, and our activities that this immunity is failing. Do you know what this reminds me of? I'll give you a simple example. Those who are in the know will understand. A child gets sick. He has a temperature of 37.2 degrees Celsius, but we immediately start reducing his temperature. Give him antibiotics, strong antibiotics. After all, the child is sick, right? And we do this every time. Who will that person grow up to be? A healthy person or not? A being with no immunity will grow up. As of today, the anthropogenic factor has had a very strong impact on the environment. We are not saying that it doesn't affect CO2. But if we take it on a scale of, excuse me, our atmosphere, it is such a tiny percentage that, again, it is easily compensated for and cannot affect anything at all. If we consider how much carbon dioxide swamps emit today, how much, excuse me, volcanoes emit. Just recently, about a month ago,
Tonga.
right, there was an eruption, the first eruption of such power over recent years. It spewed out so much carbon dioxide that we, pardon me, as whole humanity would have to emit for a very long time to reach this amount. Isn't that so?
Those very swamps in Congo actually contain carbon dioxide.
Of course.
In the amount equivalent to our entire humanity emitting it worldwide over 3 years.
We'd have to try really hard. Here's a simple answer.
Right, emitting CO2 from burning fossil fuels.
Again, lies about green energy that is foisted on us very actively. What for? It's a good question, isn't it? If we look honestly from an environmental and economic perspective, it is simply nonsense. It is much more harmful than burning those very hydrocarbons. It takes so much fossil fuels to produce these green power systems and subsequently to maintain them, while during disposal they cause a lot of harm overall, during both manufacturing and operation. What's the point of all this? Lies and deceit are everywhere. You know, if we look sensibly from the perspective of the consumerist format, as you say, 600 billion is a weighty argument for many people to prove to us with such anger and fanaticism that 0.0004% can affect something. Guys, haven't you studied physics at all? Let's compare weight, the presence of everything else, and look from a chemical reaction perspective at what is taking place. By the way, from the perspective of chemical reaction in physics, what does saturation of our atmosphere with carbon dioxide do? What does carbon dioxide do? After all, scientists conducted these experiments more than once. Our guys played around too and conducted an elementary experiment. It turns out that the presence of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere slows down thermal conductivity. The less carbon dioxide, the greater the thermal conductivity is. Some proponents would say, yes, it's the release of heat from our planet, from our atmosphere, from our planet into space. Well, you know, somehow it is.
It has already been proven that in recent years our planet doesn't release as much heat into outer space as it did before. In other words, the conditions have already changed.
Right. Lies and deception are everywhere. That's what the consumerist format is all about. This multi-purpose Voskhod complex was precisely designed to fight this consumerist format. Do you know why it is Voskhod?
Why?
It is also interesting why it has been named Voskhod, sunrise. When the sun rises, darkness disappears. All evil lives in darkness. All the theft, all the filth, all the lies, and all the deceit actually take place in darkness. I'll put it simply. If Kazakhstan had had this multi-purpose Voskhod complex in operation at least 3 months before the well-known events in early 2022, these events wouldn't have happened. They simply wouldn't. Even 3 months in advance, it would have exposed everyone and everything, and all the plans would have been destroyed, and a lot of human lives would have been saved. After all, these are human lives. Not only would there have been no upheaval, stress, destruction, or anything else, but lives would have been saved too. Why? Because this system exposes everything. It exposes all possible conspiracies and betrayals. It shows who is a traitor and who is not, who steals and who doesn't steal, who cheats and who doesn't cheat. Well, the system is truly unique. If we take this complex, it is good and all that. But in the consumerist format, it is unacceptable. Do you know why? Because, let's say, even if a top leader wants to have this system deployed in their country, this is very convenient. Imagine, every day, the top leader receives information about the situation in the country. It can be in the form of charts of any kind. A lot is laid out in numbers there, whatever is convenient, and he can look into individual industries or the country as a whole. This is very convenient. He sees who the traitor is. let's say, as well as the efficiency of every chief and everything else of each enterprise, if necessary, up to enterprises. It can really show everything. The top leader may be for it, but there are second, third, fifth, and 10th officials who will do anything to prevent it from deploying in their country. They will find a way to explain it and say, this is unacceptable, because a comma is put in the wrong place, or by mistake. And again, this may be classified information that will leak somewhere through this system. You know, one can always tell a lie just to sneak away from something that might expose human deprivation. Although, again, even commercial use of this system is also acceptable. For example, if we consider serious international banks, it's just that when creating it, we analyzed a lot. We dealt with all sorts of things, involved consultants, various experts, financial analysts, and so forth, and we just looked at how it all works. Well, on the one hand, this is interesting, and on the other hand, it is very advantageous for, let's say, a large international bank. They constantly conduct. They have their own security department as well as an audit department and so on. So imagine, what is an audit conducted by their department? They are engaged in. There are a lot of branches and they have to inspect and calculate it all. It's a lot of people who are busy spending money to keep things in order inside the bank. Plus, the security department determines which firms are dangerous, whom to give and whom not to give loans to. While in this case, there is just a single multi-purpose complex, which can optimize, say, that very bank to an unlimited extent. Let's put it so. I'm quite serious. First of all, it's the audit of the whole bank, regardless of the number of branches. Online monitoring is going on almost constantly. Moreover, the complex can calculate the efficiency of each employee. Moreover, it can expand the scope of the bank's services. Do you know the most interesting thing that has been done? Not only is it capable of, say, conducting a company assessment, audit, and everything else, but it's also capable of creating a forecast. Let's say a short-term, a medium-term, and a long-term forecast. In other words, it can forecast the development of this or that company. It's actually very interesting. And we tested the complex on leading countries and very large leading companies based on publicly available information. Let's put it this way. That doesn't mean we penetrated them, but we took publicly available information. As a rule, we tested the information from past years and identified the results, so up to 85% of the forecasts were correct. It's really unthinkable when a machine...
It operates like swarm intelligence, right?
Yes, when a machine calculates a company's capabilities, it takes into account everyone and everything, including the human factor, economics and everything else. That is, it makes forecasts. So imagine, for that very bank, it forecasts the growth of one company and the collapse of another company. Whom to give a loan and whom not to. Again, providing support for various transactions and performing them. Plus, conducting that very audit for one or another company. For example, you have a company, and you are serviced in a certain bank. However, you have to conduct an audit at other companies,
Right.
and forecasts at still other ones. Whereas here you have all in one, that is, you are actually being served. Moreover, it is very easy to calculate the demand for certain goods in the market. Plus, the machine is able to analyze, divide all the companies by sectors, and even connect them. In other words, it's enough to prompt a manager if there is a need. Your company needs this, that thing is available there. So it's about connecting and building the so-called islands of cooperation. So it really includes a lot.
The single economy of the creative society is based on this.
Quite right.
By the way.
That's what the machine is designed for, to build a single economy, to rid the creative society of these vestiges of consumerism. In the creative society, this machine is critically needed. That's what it was created for. As for how it can be used in the consumerist format, like I said, it can be used by countries, by those very banks or auditing companies. Well, it has extended capabilities. It is possible to use it in many fields. For example, in a large transnational corporation. On the other hand, it's a very powerful machine. Yes, that's profitable. It optimizes a lot of things. Its adoption can bring billion-dollar profits. And for large companies, even multi-billion-dollar profits. This is clear. but compared to its primary function, it is certainly nothing. The only thing is that, like I said, it's funny. We already predict that no one will show any interest in it until the creative society is built.
Igor Mikhailovich, you said that this system is the simplest in terms of complexity.
Yes.
Couldn't it have been created, I don't know, for example, by other IT companies in the world? Or was there no task to get rid of corruption?
You see, we say that it is the simplest in terms of complexity, taking into account the two projects that were performed before. I mean, this is the third development, while the previous two are much more complicated. And they are really more important in the long run for all humankind than this one, while this one is a tool. It's a tool against corruption, against theft, and against stupidity. It's something that can optimize, enhance, and improve a business. It is needed where people really want to have order and really want everything to be fine. People need this in the creative society as a transition until everything gets right. So we decided, instead of playing with ants and sending them back and forth in time, which we cannot do due to certain reasons, we decided to do what we can do. And we've already done it, so to say. We will show it all for people to review. You've touched upon this. Couldn't anyone else do it? I'll put it this way, no one could. If we take the largest IT companies today, then imagine, in order to do what we have done, the most difficult thing is to write a technical specification. Without a technical specification, it's impossible to do this. Well, in order to write a technical specification, like the one for the multi-purpose complex, Voskhod, you should know it all. What works and how to build it all. Just imagine, you have to write a technical specification for every IT professional and see it as a whole. It's already challenging. Then, at the time of this development, you will need hundreds of specialists involved as consultants, from financial analysts to security experts. In other words, it is actually hundreds of specialists who should constantly consult and adjust this writing. How many IT specialists will it take to write it all out like this? Lots of them. I'm afraid to even voice the number here. And how long will it take? Many years. Even if they want to, even if they have technically, let's say, they have everything written. They have a technical specification, consultants and IT specialists. Moreover, in this case, they must be good ones, but it's impossible to do that in less than 5 years, even with the tremendous involvement of everyone and everything. How much will it cost financially? Well, if you look at it honestly, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. Who would go for creating a product that would not be in demand in our consumerist format? Well, really?
Of course.
Honestly, which of the countries would implement this in service for itself? I'm serious. Joking aside, we'll see it all in real life. Why go far?
Of course.
As I said, it's like fighting corruption. In my understanding, it 100% correlates with fighting climate by means of this wave of fighting CO2, the anthropogenic factor. It's exactly the same. The same amount of money is spent in both cases, and it's just as pointless, and it progresses just as much. Isn't that so?
You've mentioned the key point here that there is no one to set such a task, because if we even look at science, in fact, most of the funding of that very science is mostly characterized as sponsorship.
No, well, I agree, but you take science, whereas here we even take the commercial component. I gave you a simple example. For instance, to use it in a bank. If we take major international banks, then a bank would save up to $1.5 billion annually on the smallest things, thanks to optimization. You can deploy it on a larger scale, and it will bring dozens of billions in revenues. If we take an average well-known auditing company, let it be an international auditing company, a medium-sized one, with implementation of this complex, this auditing company can become the leading one, with a turnover of dozens of trillions, and literally within a few years, because it will have no competitors. And those services that it can provide, will anyone be able to pull it off? No, they won't. I mean, it's interesting, even in terms of commerce, but it also exposes corruption, making it impossible to steal. Isn't that interesting? Why do people go to work? A simple question. In order to simply work, right? As they say,
To invent schemes.
Exactly.
Yes, also minds.
Do you know what one financial analyst told us? When he looked at the complex at the stage of completion, he saw how it worked, and he said, guys, if you created something that would allow people to efficiently steal and cover the traces so that no one would find it, it would be
In great demand.
a huge success. As for what you've done, he said, I'm afraid that no one needs it. We explained to him that it was done for the Creative Society. He became very enthusiastic and said, yes, for that it will work. But otherwise, such a respectable, authoritative person in financial circles, a sensible man said, well, if it helped to steal, then yes, it would be demanded. But if it identifies thieves, who would shit on one's own head? Only a bat would do that. This is ridiculous, of course, but it's a fact. That's the way our world is arranged.
And it has to be changed. And the world can be much better.
It can.
The creative society.
It can.
Everything can be different.
It has to be better. In any case, we are striving for it. In reality, we see that humanity has a chance. If we do not believe that humanity has a chance, we wouldn't have spent so much time and effort on creating even this multi-purpose complex, Voskhod. The question will arise for some people right away. Guys, if all this is so complicated, how did you do it? It will arise 100%. I'll answer. I won't tease you, friends. We used 2 previous developments. Therefore, we
Succeeded.
although it was a little bit difficult, but we managed to do it. And we did it with an open heart for the sake of the future. So, when you do it for people and for the sake of the future, when you do it from your heart, it feels good. It feels good indeed. It makes sense. Even, I'm sorry, such a material thing, and it's a trivial material thing, but it's inspiring when you see that it can change the world for the better. That's the point.
Igor Mikhailovich, I would surely like to express my admiration for XP Energy, for the work of the team, because there are already 3 products, in fact. I understand that the 3rd one is already on the final stage. There are 3 developments that can indeed serve people in the creative society.
They not just can, but they are aimed at serving people to the fullest, in reality, but already in the creative society. In the consumer's format, I don't see any prospects for them. The only thing is that this 3rd development, the last one, can be used, but as we've already said, it is unlikely. Generally speaking, the previous 2 developments are also aimed exclusively at the creative society because they cannot be implemented in the consumer's format. Otherwise, there would be a great danger. Well, it so happened that our company is engaged in non-commercial, so to say, developments, yet they are rather interesting, quite interesting for the future. But as of today, nothing commercial of this kind.
I know that you won't stop at this point. I'll just ask you the following question. Do you have anything planned for the future? Any other interesting projects?
We will proceed from our capabilities. There are a lot of desires and a lot of prospects. Again, we do not discard experiments with time. In fact, if we approach it in the right way, we can look at history live. It's interesting. You cannot jump into the future. The linearity of time won't allow that. As for the past, it is easy to jump into the past. Let's put it this way. But what I would really like to do today is to sort out our communications. For example, why? For example, I am personally annoyed by interruptions in the internet. Poor quality transmission of that very picture on TV. You are watching a movie and it just freezes. Well, it is somehow uninteresting. The phone
Connection.
is also a problem. Why? It receives a signal here and it doesn't receive it there. The connection here is worse and there it is better, but we can actually solve it as a whole. So there's an idea of approaching this more seriously. I don't know what we're going to do. We're going to discuss it. Yet, we have many options. But I would like to address this very issue. What is the basis of modern communications? A simple question. An electromagnetic wave. Let's say, it is completely unpromising. I mean, If you have seen, maybe our friends have seen internet cables running across oceans and through everything. We have the entire globe tangled in those cables. Every house has these cables. Some have optical fiber, some have ordinary wires, but it's all split up. It is billions of tons of metal that we pull from one side to another in order to communicate. And what is our cellular communication, right? Or satellite communication? Well, that's ridiculous indeed. It is the 21st century. I understand that we haven't become a civilization yet, that we are fragmented communities. We're in a consumer's format. I do understand all that, but we can change it all, friends. Why do we need satellites? Why do we need to pollute the Earth's orbit with hardware in order to talk on the phone or watch TV? A simple question. Why do we need these cellular stations with bad transmission? Why do we need the internet, which can transmit, a miserable amount of information? It is limited. Yet, now there is a new project, let's say, when a bunch of satellites are launched to make the internet, which is even worse than fiber optics. Isn't that funny? It really is. How much junk, how much stuff is being put into orbit? What for? For us to use bad internet. These are multi-billion-dollar projects. They are also called commercial. Where is commerce? In what? In consumerism? I understand it, but I don't understand how this can work and how human thought is actually directed at creating cumbersome systems that create plenty of inconvenience. At XP Energy, we just think a little bit, and I teach the guys to think in a different way. A lot of people will come up with a question. What do you suggest? I'll tell you what we suggest. We look at the root of the matter, at the very core. After all, quite recently, if we take it, humankind didn't yet know what electricity was and couldn't use it, didn't they? They had no idea at all.
Yes.
The works of Faraday, for example, no one had any idea of how to use his inventions.
And there is a well-known case when the minister asked him, "You are a famous person. You've done so many experiments with electricity. What is the use of your new discovery?" And he replied, "I know not, but I wager that one day your government will tax it."
Tax, right.
Therefore, basically, every country still earns money
On Faraday's inventions.
on Faraday's inventions, on producing and selling energy.
Absolutely right. But at that time, which was quite recently in history, people didn't even know how to use electricity, right? However, today.
Yes, they studied why hair gets electrified. They observed.
Absolutely right. But today we use it. Why? Not so long ago, people observed, as you say, that hair gets electrified, lightning strikes, and there is electricity. Faraday was the first to conduct, one of the first, let's say, to conduct some experiments, but they didn't yet know how this could be put into practice. What do we think of at XP Energy today? We think of what is trendy nowadays. Quantum entanglement. What is it? Two particles that are connected to each other. Everyone knows this. Let's not go deep into it and just repeat a little bit. Two particles which we can separate by any distance, even send them to a neighboring galaxy, are absolutely connected with each other. It's enough to change the spin in one particle, and the spin of the other, one immediately changes. Thus, it violates all laws, all of Einstein's postulates, and everything in the world. Why? Because there is no speed of transmission. It happens instantaneously. It's interesting, isn't it? Many people took notice of that.
Right.
They decided to build computers, and many think of how to use this effect. Do you know what they think? They think of how to use these particles and how to get something out of them. Meanwhile, at XP Energy, we think differently. Friends, let me explain our way of thinking. There's one particle and there's another particle. An online connection occurs between them. They are in an incessant contact with each other. Why incessant? Because as soon as we change the spin here, it changes there. The two little particles are interconnected regardless of distance. Hence, they transmit and receive a signal. They are constantly interconnected. Okay? What kind of energy can this particle generate? How is it able to emit that signal? And how is it able to receive and process it? What kind of signal is that? Yet we can see it. You know, When Faraday approached his experiments, he saw it, and he started conducting experiments on what he saw. So we do not approach this in terms of how to exploit these particles, but we approach the point of how to exploit this phenomenon which occurs between the two particles. On this basis, it is possible to change everything. In other words, if we discover what it is and how to use it, we can change everything, and we will discover. I don't see any problem here. After all, this phenomenon really exists. It doesn't violate any laws of physics. It exists, it's just a different world. If we study it in a little more detail, we will be able to use this effect, not between two particles, but between two telephones, between a transmitting station and my TV, or, pardon me, an internet provider, and your gadget. There is no difference. And particles are not needed for that. The point is that you and I can talk on the phone with no loss of time. Look at pictures and see each other, even being in different galaxies. You see? Isn't that interesting? A simple example. For instance, people would fly to Mars. Okay, those who are going to fly there. Okay, they arrive there. How long would the radio signal go there? If something happens to them, they need urgent advice from experts. It would take 20 minutes for a signal to go just one way. Until people get it, until it is processed and transmitted back, an hour would pass. In an hour, they would already die because they need a solution right now. Isn't that true? It is. So how advanced are we as humanity? We are absolutely not. Yet we can change this. We can. Using this phenomenon, this energy that we can generate, we can use it, and we can transmit huge amounts of information with no loss of time from one point to another without any problem. Now, look further at the train of our thoughts. I'll just explain. We simply held a discussion with the guys in the following plane. I will now explain a little bit. A lot of galaxies exist in our universe, a great many planets, and everything else. There exist so many entangled particles that we simply don't have such numbers. We haven't come to them yet. And every particle is connected with its particle. After all, here there is no such thing as, when you unlock your car and the adjacent car is unlocked as well, such a superposition. Well, who hasn't encountered that? Or you have just locked your car, someone comes and unlocks his, and yours is unlocked, although it seems to be impossible since the device generates random signals. They are random. But in many cases, superposition works, while entangled particles don't have that. So this type of energy they use, and this transmission of a signal, it can transmit an enormous amount of information with no loss of time. Hence, what opens up for us? New prospects and new opportunities. In other words, we can use telephones, internet, and television. And since we can transmit a huge amount of information, which is not limited by anything, and our TV set can receive it, this means, first of all, fail-safe, wonderful television, and secondly, we can create a genuine illusion. Yet, what is illusion needed for? A simple question. It's not merely playing. Let's say, playing games is clear, but for instance, you come from work, tired, in the creative society. You worked your 4 hours, for example. You worked hard physically. Let's say you opened some food cans. Or it doesn't matter what you did. But you want to change your everyday life. You want
To escape from routine.
Right, to escape from routine, to be somewhere on the seaside, on vacation, right now. Not to get in a car and ride there, but right now. All you have to do is turn on your TV or a device that creates such a complex hologram around you, with the effect of wind, smells, and all the rest, that you can really be on the beach at any location in the world where you want. See people around and everything else. What does your consciousness need? The fact itself. It's an illusion that deceives not your brain, but your consciousness. It deceives you as personality, while in this case, you as personality deceive your consciousness. That's it. And your body chemistry returns to normal. You are on vacation. You lie on the ocean shore for a couple of hours, listen to the surf rustle, watch birds fly around, and breathe that air. Then you switch to a movie, and you're already in the middle of a dynamic movie, as one of the characters, when they run around you and something happens. This is interesting. Indeed.
But it is safe.
And it is absolutely safe for you because you're just sitting there. You understand as personality that this is just an illusion for your consciousness. You see, it's not consciousness that throws in an illusion to you, but you already control your consciousness. You throw in an illusion to consciousness in order to cause relevant chemical reactions in your body, to have a good rest, and to enjoy life. Is that bad? Plus, you have a great, excellent connection and a wonderful internet without any satellites. And do you know what the most interesting thing is? You don't need anything. One transmitting station, and that's it. And all TV sets in the world will work. There shouldn't be any towers, any transmitting stations. There shouldn't be thousands of satellites out there flying above us, right? There will be no trash in outer space.
Billions of wires.
Billions of tons of wires. All that is not needed. And if we also use FFGs, in addition to all this, which can be deployed, as you and I already discussed, but solely in the creative society, then people won't be bound in general. As of today, let's be honest, we are like tethered dogs. We are tethered to wires. We are tethered to gadgets. We have no freedom. While in that case, you will have freedom. Let's say, you don't need to charge your phone because it can have not just a battery of some kind, but an electricity generator that can run for 100 or 200 years, as long as you need it. Is that interesting? But it also opens up other prospects. It opens up prospects. Let's put it this way. If we get into the micro world, it can completely change the entire human life. I mean, food products, any household items that may be assembled of particles, as we already discussed. After all, everything in this world is composed of one and the same thing. It is merely a combination of particles that forms for you. For instance, a hot steak or, a cold beverage. All these are combinations that can be formed right here and right now. You should just learn to manage it, and the world changes. Well, as of today, it seems to be impossible. But guys, let's look 50 years ago. Let's not go too far. Did anyone think that a weapon would be created which could move at the speed of 20 Machs to kill us? I emphasize, to take our lives? No, we thought it was impossible. It was science fiction. Whereas today, we have a weapon in the world that can fly to us at such a speed and take away our lives. That's what we are doing. It's no longer science fiction. So, let us turn our attention a little bit and invest it, not in the things that take our lives, but in what gives our lives. That's the point. Again, if we take that very creative society, some people say it's impossible. If we approach, let's go back to XPNRG again. All three developments are considered to be impossible, but they already exist. They are waiting for their time to really help people, right? And if we gather all smart people, properly approach it, and start using the resources of our consciousness in the right way, it is not consciousness that will control us, but we will control it. Won't we? Find a solution to protect our planet. Yet, these are, merely cycles. It is merely energy. Yes, the cycles are destructive, but guys, it is energy. We can accumulate and redirect it. We can direct that which destroys us to creation. Isn't that right? After all, it is power. It doesn't matter what kind of power it is. It is uncontrollable. Therefore, it is chaotic. Chaotic, uncontrolled energy can destroy. But if we use this energy, we can create instead of destroying. Isn't that so? It is. If we understand the basics of energy redistribution among these particles, or their quantum entanglement, interconnection, not the interaction of two particles, but what forces them and what they control. While these particles control this very energy, this particular force, they perceive and transmit a signal. If we are able to perceive and transmit a signal, tremendous opportunities will open up for us, at least in the field of communication. But if we understand this mechanism, we will be able to control other particles as well. And if we go even further, we will be able to control various kinds of radiation and extract energy from them. You see, that's the point. If we approach our body from such an understanding, then pardon me, we can force that which is now killing our body, on the contrary, to repair and restore our body. A virus is also energy. As of today, after entering our body, it reproduces itself, lives its own life, and simply destroys. But the same virus can serve as fuel for our body too. If we use it in symbiosis with our body, it will be able to prolong our life. Again, all this is wonderful and splendid. These are tremendous prospects, but it's the prospects for a different society. They are promising for civilization, for the creative society, and a lot of things are promising for the ideal society. In a consumer's format, this would create problems. For example, those very communications we are talking about, they are wonderful for a free society. In the consumerist format, how do you keep track of what they're talking about, right? Pardon me, terrorists or corruptionists can negotiate something and we won't know that. And what about deceiving one's husband when, I'm sorry, the connection is bad? I don't hear what you're saying, right? Or on the contrary, someone you don't want to talk to is calling. Isn't that so? Here, you wouldn't say the connection in the phone is bad. I'm sorry, I drove into a tunnel. The signal between particles actually cannot be shielded with anything. We don't have anything today in our understanding to put a screen so that particles couldn't connect to each other. They connect to each other through galaxies. You see, in consumerism and with our present-day thinking, with our approach, this is unacceptable.
And it's a serious step to even find tools to confront climate.
Well, climate. It is necessary to confront climate if we want to survive, isn't it? Yet, we should start with something and do something. So, we set minimal tasks for ourselves. I don't know if we will engage in this or not, but it is very promising and interesting. So, we will see. As you can see, last time, we were going to deal with time. But in the end, we engaged in a completely different development.
Igor Mikhailovich, since we have come back to the topic of time, I would like to ask you one more clarifying question regarding time. You know, Chinese philosophers said that duration of time depends on the mood which a person is in. That's one point. And the second point is the following. Basically, apocalyptic predictions say that in the end times, time will compress. So here I would also like to talk about the role of people, spiritually developed people, in the issue of slowing down time for this sphere. Number one, is mood a secret of longevity?
No, mood is not. But a positive mood is always more pleasant than, excuse me, a depressed state, right? Fuss is the cause of wasting time. Again, it's uncontrollable consciousness. Let me just explain why we spend a lot of energy. And since we spend a lot of energy, hence we live faster. Again, we thus produce a rapid outflow of our allot. What's the reason?
Right. We have such a world of information technology. We have a lot of everything.
Of course. Many people will say a mass of information that we receive nowadays. The question is not how much information we receive. The question is how fussy our consciousness is. When it jumps from one thought to another, when it creates a fuss, flutters and bothers us, we have no peace. We spend a lot of energy. Precisely the powers of allot. Hence, our time flows fast. We burn our lives away. Whereas, if we maintain discipline of our mind, if we are able to make our consciousness serve us, we do not accept the massive thoughts which it throws into us, these illusions. We accept what we need and we finance with our attention, that is, we spend our life force, prana, allot, only on what we need. Thus, we spend it thriftily. Hence our life, or our sphere. Here we are as a human, as a microsphere. We slow down the flow of our time, our individual time. We cannot influence the linearity of general time, but we can influence our own. The same applies to a group of people when a single egregore is created. When people are calm, when they are in happiness, in joy, in life, then, naturally, everything slows down.
And when attention is invested in one goal, as it turns
Right,
out.
certainly.
Although, it illusorily seems to many people that now they will rest, gain strength, gain energy and health.
They won't. And what difference does it make? Just look, again, let's take the problem of the creative society. What is the biggest problem today at the first stage of building the creative society?
Informing.
What's the problem? The problem is that information goes from a person to a person very slowly. Because of what? Not because people do not want it. Well, for some, it is merely because of stubbornness. For some, it is because consciousness controls them and says, this is nonsense, utopia, don't get involved there. In other words, consciousness immobilizes them. Clearly, these are absolute slaves of consciousness who have negative attitudes to everything, including the creative society. There are only a few of them. But what do the majority of people wallow in? In idleness. And what does it do to consciousness? Consciousness starts actively working. For instance, a person gets inspired, looking at how people spread information and what they talk about. He agrees, he understands, he is quite intelligent, literate, and educated. He understands that this is true. It's true that there's a climate problem. He understands that not so much time is left, that we need to unite, that we can do a lot, we can change our world, and we can live happily. A person is sensible. He wants happiness and joy for his children, for his offspring. However, he listens to his consciousness, which begins to tell him that tomorrow he can do this or that and loads him with a bunch of thoughts. And a person sits, does nothing, and listens to his consciousness. And then he has no strength. He should get up, but he's immobilized. He should act, but he cannot. Why? Exactly because personality doesn't perceive whether our body and our consciousness acted or thought about that. Energy is expended exactly as much as needed for the action. Yet, when a person in his head, simultaneously perceives and resolves a lot of issues, including how he will act as regards the creative society.
How to predict all this?
Personality has already financed it all. These funds have already been spent, and a person has done nothing. Plus, he was solving a bunch of household issues and everything else, but at the same time, he was sitting on a couch. He ran out of strength. Inspiration disappeared, and he postponed it until later. For the future. This is trite immobilization by the system itself. Thus, consciousness either puts a person against someone, he actually hates others. He hates. There are those, what are they called? Haters.
Yes.
As far as I remember, yes, on the internet, who defile everyone, everywhere. That's their essence, in fact. They're simply rotten inside. So the system immobilizes and forces people to be like that. They are merely slaves. They feel bad when somebody feels good, Well, there is such a thing, but there are very few of them, while the majority of people are exactly those who live in illusion, in the literal sense of the word. The system, or rather, their consciousness, sucks all the juices out of them and immobilizes them. I'll give a simple example. There's a group of people, for example, classmates. There are 3 or 4 people who are friends with each other. One is totally reckless and unable to think. A couple of them are very clever people, and one is mediocre. Which of them will become a businessman? And which of them will become an alcoholic, or no one at all? A simple question. What do you think? What will it tell you? The one who thinks less and acts more will become richer and more successful. Why? Because he knows. He needs that. He goes and does it because he knows. He needs it.
Attention is invested in the goal right away.
Right. He invests attention in the goal and doesn't invest attention in problems. Those who are accustomed to think a lot instead of doing will think, now I'm going to start a business. I'll start it and problems will arise. How will I solve them? And he already solves problems of a non-existent business at most. But he has pridefulness. He wants to become somebody, since he is smarter, especially when the other person begins to rise. This one starts drinking to drown his grief. He drinks 100 grams, and that's it. He already understands that the other person is a fool. He is richer and more successful, but he's a fool. And this calms the alcoholic down, doesn't it? That's how the world is divided.
Yes, unfortunately, such is the world.
Such is the world. You see, the problem is that the system immobilizes people at the beginning. But nevertheless,
such a misfortune of being clever.
Right, a misfortune of being clever. While you should just, if you feel it is necessary, you go ahead and you do it. You will think later. That's when everything works out.
When you face it.
When you face it.
Or maybe you won't have to face those problems, right?
Most likely, you won't. Of course, consciousness simply creates problems and fuss over nothing. Again, if you succumb to this fuss, you inevitably lose right away. We already discussed how the system can immobilize even heroes, true heroes of modern times, who have done a lot. But the system defeats them.
What an illusion of rest it draws, and how everything is actually different at the level of energy structure.
That too, certainly, of course. So the less.
Well, this is a great life hack.
Life hack, exactly.
Of how we can be the most effective even when building the creative society.
Not only that, even in everyday life.
In everyday life, yes.
Again, how to use your consciousness as a tool. You should understand all of this. If consciousness tells you fairy tales and draws plans, you should understand that personality has already financed it. If you don't act, you will never do it. You know, it's like, I'm going on a diet and I'll start doing sports on Monday. If you have decided to do sports and go on a diet right now and go to the gym as well. Then everything will work out for you. If you postpone it, it will never work out. You will postpone it every time. Isn't it so?
It is.
We should understand how we are arranged.
We should act ourselves.
Of course.
Do you know what else I've recalled? Sufis had an interesting story. They say that Caliph Umar once walked along the street and saw people sitting and doing nothing. So he asked them, "Who are you?" They said, "We are the ones who have entrusted our affairs to the Lord and are sitting and setting hopes on Him." He said, "You know you are mistaken. In reality, you are idlers who parasitize on other people's work, because the one who really entrusts his affairs to the Lord immediately plants a seed."
That's right. He cultivates, plants, and grows his seed.
And only then surrenders to God's will.
Yes, and then he sets his hopes on God. As for such idlers and loafers, we see a lot of them, who trust in God's will instead of serving Him. After all, it is easier to set your hopes on God and blame Him for all the wretchedness of your life than to roll up your sleeves and serve God, right?
And this is a desperate need
It's a great need
of our society right now, judging by how many...
for each of us as well, isn't it?
Yes, as personalities.
Yet, what does everything begin with? With trivial work on oneself, friends. With simple work, with the awareness of who you are, right? Whereas our connection with each other begins with love, with a person's love for God, for the spiritual world, and with love for each other, right?
Right. Therefore, one shouldn't be indifferent to one's neighbors either.
Certainly.
One cannot be in the position, "My house is at the edge," as they also say.
Oh no, again, my house is at the edge. It's none of my business. Just look at how consciousness alters everything, how the system twists everything. What did "my house is at the edge" mean in the past? In the past, settlements were built by the roads, and those who were stronger, braver, and took responsibility for the whole settlement actually built their houses at the edge. Those were fighters and warriors who were the first to defend a village. So, when they said, "My house is at the edge," they were treated with respect. Or people said, "This man's house is at the edge." It's the same as a hero. But nowadays, everything has been twisted. So, "My house is at the edge," it's none of my business. Just like the proverb, the end justifies the means. Hence, we step over people's heads, take away other people's lives to get richer, to become powerful or something else. But what was removed from this proverb? That the end justifies the means if your goal is to save the soul. That's what it originally sounded like, right?
Right. Oh, Igor Mikhailovich, this is so interesting. And there is awareness that in this period of time, looking at what is happening in the world, looking at how climate strikes each of us,
Yes.
from the sides we don't know, it turns out that each of us has a position. My house is at the edge, because all of us are at the edge of a precipice.
There should be a position of "my house is at the edge." You see, we are all vulnerable to a strike by the climate, and that trouble which is already taking place. Yet, there should be such a mindset that our houses are at the edge, and we should take responsibility not only for our future, but also for the future of our neighbors, friends, acquaintances, and even strangers. Why? Because then, and only then, can we change something. When we stop being indifferent to ourselves, to our near and dear people, to humanity, and stop being indifferent to our planet. It is also alive and defends itself. Just look, we started talking about the planet. We were just talking about the planet's immunity. And recently I heard they're going to make devices that will purify our air, remove, CO2 from our atmosphere. Can you imagine what it is? Friends, if we approach this issue in the right way, at the time when our planet is strenuously producing CO2, in order to create this bumper, this shield, we will remove it. That is, we will artificially reduce the immunity so that the patient would die sooner. Is that what we do? And that's the truth of life. We have a lot of truths like this. Yet we want to live, don't we? We are people. We want to live.
Yes.
So here's the paradox. In order to really live, we should eliminate stupidity. And we should start with ourselves. There are many more things we can talk about. God willing, we'll talk again. But for today, it seems to me, Tatiana, we should perhaps, we should say goodbye. We have said a lot already. Thank you, friends. Let's just love each other. Let's begin with a simple thing. Thank you for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor Mikhailovich.
Thank you, friends. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for understanding, and thank you for not giving up.